on this story, we can bring in our international affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert. Doug, good to see you. Vladimir Zelensky thinks the UN Security Council serves no purpose. Is he right?
Yeah, he basically says it's a broken system, at worst, dysfunctional at best. What he's saying is it's basically failed to live up to its mission for which it was created. After the devastation of World War II, they set up the UN, the UN and the Security Council, the world's preeminent security forum, if you will, to basically maintain, as you will, peace and stability in the world. And what it did is it invested a small number of countries in that council, the so-called permanent members of the 15-member Security Council, of which there are 5 permanent members. It doesn't say in the charter that they have a veto, but it does say that any resolution or vote by these members requires a consensus among these 5 members. So it's essentially a veto. And it is this veto which has enabled various members, but more in recent times, and especially with Ukraine, one member in particular, Russia, to essentially render the United Nations Security Council, which is supposed to prevent war and wars and acts of aggression, just as we're seeing in Ukraine, has rendered it impotent, completely powerless to do anything to stop it. One example, so February 25th, the day after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, a resolution condemning the invasion in the United Nations Security Council, which was voted by 11 of the 15 members of the council. It was blocked. It was vetoed by one member. It was vetoed by Russia, and it fell at the first hurdle. There was no condemnation. In a very rare move, in order to get the condemnation, the outrage of the world community at least reflected in some vote before the UN body, it went to the full General Assembly. Yeah. This isn't done normally. On March 2nd, 141 of the 193 members of the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution demanding that Russia immediately withdraw its military forces from Ukraine. What's significant? Yes, 35 abstained. What's significant is of those 100, all the members in the UN, 193, only 5 voted to block that move in the UN General Assembly, not the Security Council, the Assembly. And that was Russia, North Korea, Syria, Eritrea, and Belarus. Just giving you the list, no comment. So this is why he's saying Russia needs to be held to account. You need to have a system by which it can be held to account. You cannot have a system where one of the aggressors, the main protagonist in an unprovoked war against a country, is able to essentially veto any action to stop that aggression.
Now, all permanent members, Doug, have used their veto in the Security Council at one time or another,
Yes,
but Russia tends to use it more than others.
And I have the figures to show you just how much more than others. Let's bring up a chart that I whipped up last night, actually. Hasn't changed since last night. Look at this. So 5 permanent members, Russia, the US, the UK, France, and China. Here comes China. Look at that. Russia took over the seat of the USSR in 1992, so I lumped them together. All together, dating back to the creation of the Security Council in 1946, 146 times. In the early days of the Security Council, in the 40s, 50s, it was almost always the USSR vetoing various measures. And almost in this case, in recent times, the Russia's veto has been almost predominantly against, say, Syria, preventing the world community, the Council, from taking any actions to thwart Bashar Assad in Syria and his war there. And now we're seeing it in Ukraine. We also saw it to a limited extent in Georgia a little over 10 years ago in the war there. The U.S., 82 times. That's a lot of vetoes too, you'll say. And in recent times, the U.S. has used over 50 vetoes in resolutions involving Israel. The U.S. has often been the lone member, the only one on the Security Council, to veto resolutions condemning Israel for anything when there has been a flare-up in the Middle East or an Israel versus Hamas sort of conflict. And then you see UK 31, they're way behind. France 17, China usually abstains, but it's also used its veto 18 times. There have been 294 vetoes altogether by these council members in the history of the United Nations Security Council. This veto is really the problem, the obstacle, as Zelensky sees it, especially with Ukraine right now, to peace.
Whether it's Ukraine and other issues around the world, in fact, we always see this issue coming up where the veto blocks things from moving forward. So can the Security Council be reformed?
It's very difficult, and you're not the first one asking the question, Gelato. This has been sort of batted about since 2005, well over a decade, the issue of reforming the Security Council. So what do? How do you reform it? First of all, it would require a vote from all 5 members, which goes back to that veto issue. So presumably, none of the members might be inclined to vote a reform which would deprive them of the power they have of being able to use that veto. So that's already a stumbling block. But let's say they were able to agree on some sort of report. One of the proposals that has been put forth and mooted is perhaps having what I was talking about, the UN General Assembly is sort of the bigger body. Why not develop a mechanism whereby it can override a veto from the Security Council in just these types of conflicts and wars, such as Ukraine? I talked about that vote, the 141 members voting for Russia to immediately withdraw its military forces. We saw how good that did. And that's a non-binding measure. There's no enforcement mechanism with the UN General Assembly. It has peacekeepers, but it can't really enforce it. But they're saying, why not have a mechanism where if you have 2/3 of the 193 members of the UNGA, the General Assembly, representing at least 2/3 of the total world population, so those 2 criteria there, why not enable that to override the veto mechanism? It's just one possibility. It's not a be-all and end-all. It's not a cure-all. But it's something they're saying at least that would render the United Nations, the broader body, perhaps more powerful or able to actually bring its influence to bear in horrific situations like this, where the world has been forced to literally look on powerless and not be able to do anything when you have, as Zelensky puts it, yes, a war of aggression unprovoked against his country, and the UN Security Council has been able to do absolutely nothing to stop it.
Indeed. Doug, thank you very much for that. Douglas Herbert there.